All right, we are live. Thank you to everybody who is joining us today. We are here for our February Roundtable, and we're going to be talking today about managing SDR performance, managing SDR and outbound programs, and how we do that, what decisions we make through the process, how we look at performance, how we measure the individual sales reps, and how we measure the success of the program as a whole. And I'm excited today to be joined by three guests, one that you will know from previous sessions that we've run, but also two that haven't been on before, but that we know well as an organization. So I'm joined today by Steph McLaurin, whose surname has changed. So if I get it wrong at least once in this session, I apologize. Steph is the head of sales at Birdie Home Care Software, and has been on my podcast and been in our network for a good couple of years now, and somebody I really admire with her experience and her opinions, and also by Chris Dudridge, who is the VP of Sales for EMEA at Sirocco. And Chris is somebody, again, who's been on our pod, and I met at CSO conference 3 years ago now, I think, and brings a huge amount of experience to the discussion today. What I'm excited about is that we've got somebody who's in there building an SDR team right now and an SDR function right now, and somebody who's done it across a couple of different organizations, large organizations, from more of a leadership perspective as well. So we'll get a couple of different views across today. And then finally, also, as always, joined by Neil Clark, stepping back from the hosting seat after my illness last month into the co-pilot seat after such a good job. I'm surprised you didn't nick my job last month, Neil. So thank you for being modest enough to step back and let me drive again.
It's all yours.
Gritting his teeth. Steph, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. Sorry, it took me a minute to find the unmute button, but I'm good. Yeah, can't complain. I've just come back down to London to be part of what appears to be a hailstorm. But yeah, just embracing that British weather, I guess. Brilliant stuff. Chris, how's things?
Doing fine, thanks very much. Still stuck at home. I sadly haven't been up to London as much as I'd like to be, but yeah, I'm still in the jungle.
In the jungle. Love it. Absolutely love it. Well, thank you for joining us. Guys, I won't pass this to Neil, but Steph, I'm going to come to you first. If you wouldn't mind just giving people that don't know you the quick 60 seconds. Who's Steph? Who's Birdie? Just give us a bit of context.
Absolutely. Thanks. Well, hi, everyone. I'm Steph. I have spent the last decade in sales. About 8.5 or 9 of those years has been spent in leadership positions, which I've absolutely adored and loved every minute of. Pretty much. I'm currently head of sales at a Series A startup called Birdie. In the more recent years of my career, I've taken a real interest in how technology can tackle some of society's most significant challenges. And Birdie is tackling a challenge that really is quite dear to my heart, given my experiences with the care industry. So for those of you that don't know who Birdie is, we're backed by Index Ventures, one of the largest venture capital firms in the world. So it's been an incredible journey for us to embark upon in the last year. And what we're focused on achieving and pretty obsessed about is how we can radically improve the lives of older adults. So we want people to age with confidence, and we want them to be able to do that in the comfort of their own home, as opposed to ending up in a care home, which is what so many of the older population sadly end up having to do. And we do that by working with home care agencies. So organizations who employ carers that come into somebody's home. Now, the challenge that these agencies face is that their margins are constrained, and they're often operating on paper processes which are completely inefficient and mean that they don't have any real-time visibility of what care is being delivered. So the purpose of Birdie is to inject some operational efficiencies into the way these organizations work. It's to give them that real-time insight into what care is being delivered as it's being delivered. And then there's this incredibly exciting opportunity for us whereby we can leverage artificial intelligence and data and look at how we can intervene and how we can prevent someone from deteriorating. So an incredible organization. I'm, as head of sales, responsible for 3 things. So I support our SDRs and our SDR manager in generating pipeline. I work with our sales execs who are taking the demos on and converting them into signed contracts and partners for the future. And then I also work with our leadership team and executive committee to make sure that our sales and acquisition strategy aligns with the company's overall mission.
Very good. I'm sure we'll be focusing on that SDR piece the most today, but great to hear you've got such a breadth across the business. Chris, same for you, please, if you don't mind just giving people a bit of context.
Yeah, certainly. It's always hard to follow, Steph.
Sorry, I should have gone the other round, shouldn't I?
I know. Save the best to last, but sadly not in this case. But yeah, I'm Chris Duddridge. I suppose I've been in sales for nearly 20 years, probably actually just over 20 years now. I sort of started my career at a company that then became Sage, moved to an organization called Deltec, which was a ERP provider. Most recently, before my current role, I was the MD at UiPath before its IPO earlier last year. And I'm now at Sirocco as the head of sales for Europe. A little bit about Sirocco. We're a discovery organization that help large enterprise organizations discover how work gets done within their organization, which is loosely termed as hybrid process mining, which is a combination of task mining and process mining, and using deep capture and machine learning in a similar sort of fashion to help understand large data sets in a much more consumable fashion. But I think our ultimate mission is to sort of build the most scalable map of how work gets done within enterprise organizations. And that's largely founded on the fact that today work has changed, as we all know, quite dramatically. And essentially managers do not have it easy, in terms of understanding how that work gets done. And there's been some really fantastic articles that have been done by our founders with Harvard Business Review around things like manager work recall gap, where you're expecting a large proportion of your business to run undocumented processes, and actually their understanding of how that work gets done can be anywhere between 76 and 26% inaccurate in terms of what they know gets taken. And we're trying to help the organizations really document, map, control how that work gets done. The fundamental output is that we help organizations look at where automation might be the answer, where standardizing a process or changing the way in which it works might be the answer. But actually, fundamentally, we might just be helping organizations say, you need to train your users or your managers better. So again, that's the journey we have. It's a great continuation for me from my sort of UiPath background. But I think to link my experience back to today's topic, SDRs, I think I was trying to remember every organization I was in, whether we had an SDR team when I joined, or whether we actually implemented one over the journey that was there. And the answer was very different for each of those. But I suppose my experience has been having that desire to build an SDR community through to not really realizing the benefit of what we had until after it was gone. And so I hope to sort of share any valuable points around that as we get to the topics. But again, delighted to be your guest.
Thanks, Chris. Really appreciate it. I want to touch on the notion, and Chris, you brought this up with a short conversation just to sort of bounce some ideas around yesterday, and you immediately went to that human element. You immediately took us towards the people, and I know Steph very well, and I know she's very focused on that as well. Obviously, having worked with Neil over the last year and a half or so, I see that in him as well. So it's something the four of us have in common that we understand, and I think anybody watching this and listening to this, and by the way, guys, comments, feel free to put questions on the comments, and we'll do our best to throw them at the panel and get those answered for you. But the human element of running a sales team, particularly in the early stages, Steph, you've been through that recently. Chris, sounds like you've been involved with actually, like you say, the inception, building them out. That counts, right? That's a really important part of getting this right from the off. It's that whole, do you want to be somewhere where people genuinely care about you, where the culture is genuinely important, where your career is thought as something that's important to the organization as well? Or do you want to be somewhere where you're a number, part of a machine? And I think there is a very obvious, almost settings difference. Steph, I'll come to you. Have you got any comments on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a couple of different things I would mention on this. I think at the end of the day, a lot of the time when I'm hiring SDRs into our team, they're at the beginning of their career. And so we're always trying to juggle what actually is incredibly important to them, what is it that motivates them, what is it that drives them. Not only is that the right thing to do when you're employing somebody and taking them into your organization, we have a responsibility to grow and develop our team when they are committing so much to us. But ultimately, if you want to get the best results possible for your organization, you have to identify how you're going to get the most out of those individuals. And I think if I look at, we've been doing a huge amount of recruitment into our SDR function over the last 12 months in particular. And from speaking to lots of different recruitment agencies and different types of companies, when we look at what matters to SDRs in the workplace at the moment, there's some key topics. So one is package. It's always going to be there. It's not everything, and I don't think it's quite as important as it's historically been. But it is very, very important, particularly when you've got entry-level SDRs commanding 40 base and 20k commission, which is a whole world away from where I started as at the beginning of my career. But there's some competitive packages out there, so you need to be willing to pay competitively. Learning and development is huge, absolutely massive. Making sure that you've got the right kind of sales training and enablement program in place. Tied to that is then progression. Is there a clear, measurable path for them to succeed? Can they see examples of other people around them succeeding? Some SDRs are really motivated and driven by the brands that they're selling to. Can they talk about these sexy brands to their friends? I mean, it's not really what you get when you come to Birdie, but you come to Birdie for something slightly different, and that's the mission, and that's what I think a lot of people are really focused on at the moment. What's the purpose of what we're doing, and do I believe in it? And then the final thing is around well-being. I think there's just been such a shift in the workplace towards ensuring we're protecting the well-being of our team. We've got at Birdie, an incredibly generous well-being leave allowance for employees that sits on top of their annual leave entitlement, and it's there for them to use as they please. There's no need to record a reason unless you get to sort of 1 or 2 weeks, and that's when we need to start having a conversation about how we can support you. But I think well-being within the workplace has come on leaps and bounds, especially if I think about 10 years ago when I started the workplace and maybe turned up 5 minutes late for work and was greeted with good afternoon. I think things have changed quite considerably, but I think it's important to really focus on what matters to the people coming into your team, because that's ultimately how you'll get the best results out of them.
Love it. Chris, I'll come to you to add to that.
I'll try not to repeat the points because they're all fantastic, but I just loved the good afternoon comment there, because that is such a change in the way, and the world has changed. That was my comment earlier on, about around expectations of everyone that comes into the workplace. And my God, back in the day, that was a sin, being later than 9 a.m. yet alone what you expect people to do in terms of going over and above to deliver and contribute to your business. So thanks for reminding me about all of the managers that asked me that many times in my career. But like the question, Owen, was the human element, right? And people centricity to what we do. And I think you have to ask yourself a question, especially when you're an early stage company or you're a business that's been operating without a very large sales team, and you're looking to ramp up and go on a hyper growth journey or just grow the business. If you're building an SDR team, it's because you've seen a demand that's greater than can be serviced by the marketing or direct marketing teams alone. And more importantly, that you don't have faith that the sales teams or whoever's responsible for direct business development is able to handle the build of the pipeline outside. And so I think you have to understand, why are you building that team? Because that's really where you have to understand fundamentally, what they are going to contribute towards your business. That's what they're going to be measured on. That's what anyone that joins the business will then have goals set against. And I think there's been historically a kind of a sales driven demand for SDR. I need more leads. I need more opportunity. I need more pipeline. That sometimes doesn't remember that to get to that point, you've got to coach and develop and educate and deliver all these great things that Steph talked about around the framework of their role to actually mean that they're going to do that. And if you just expect them to come in numbers straight away, get them done, I just want appointments, I want whatever it might be. There is no holy grail to that unless you really take someone on a training journey and a development journey. And I hear allegedly there are amazing companies out there that do that for you if you don't have that skill set internally. But anyway, marketing. I think you have to turn it round to what you can do for them, and it's everything that Steph said around L&D, around coaching, around developing, around, is money the big motivator? I'm not necessarily certain it is the be all and end all to everybody at the moment, but there most certainly are different salary, in terms of what can be earned in that role. But I think with the right caliber of candidates, the most important thing to understand is how you can help them slingshot their career from getting started within an organization to very quickly ending up in marketing, so in management, or ending up in another area of the business, or in fact, as we all get used to with leavers who are going on to bigger and bigger things, actually how you can help them on their journey from starting in a foundational role. And I think I said this to you yesterday, I'll say it to everyone. The people that I developed within UiPath is a good example, and actually the people I contributed to working with in Sage, their starting roles in SDR, I now look across LinkedIn and see half of them in VP roles, sales management roles. Some of them have decided sales isn't for them because they hated it, but ultimately the progress and the slingshot that comes from that foundational role, we have to remember, for many people, is better than the return they get from 4 years at university, 5 years at university, because they don't have an academic profile that will get them into the same position that maybe an SDR career might do. But I think Steph hit all the right points. How can you put things in place for your people in that role that will elevate them and ultimately align to the reason why you started building an SDR community in the first place? So that's my view.
No, I think that's fantastic. Neil, I'm going to come to you because I think there's an interesting point here, and I was hoping our conversation would go this route, and unfortunately it has, which is that quite often we talk to people who are building an SDR function for the first time. Steph, you've touched on it. Chris, you've touched on that topic already. And we all know, I think we're mature and experienced enough to know that it fails before it succeeds. There are multiple iterations of it going wrong before it goes right. Yet, I'm going to say inexperienced leaders, maybe people setting it up for the first time, the expectation, Chris, you kind of touched on that, is so high. We need demand. We've got to bring more pipeline in. Let's get SDRs in. Give them the basics. Give them the phone. Give them someone to call. Maybe not even do that. Off they go. It will just work. And we know that there's a vast gap between that and making it work and what you actually need to give them as a set of basics. And Neil, I'd just be keen to get some thoughts on you. If you're going to build an SDR team in the first place, and you've obviously got to have the tolerance for ramping it, what are some of the basics you need to make sure you're giving them so that you're not in a position where you're a month in, 2 months in, 3 months in, and looking at the individual SDRs as to why it's not working, rather than maybe looking at yourselves?
I think the positioning from solving a problem to growing a solution is probably the mindset that a business needs to have in around the SDRs are going to be your brand ambassadors. You can set them up and they can make or break a strategy. You can sit around the senior leadership team and say, this isn't working or that's not working. I think it needs to be something that you give them, obviously the tools. So you give them the architecture, the time and the patience and allow them to be able to just grow confidence. It's a real confidence game, growing it from scratch. It's going to take a lot of time to build up pipeline and all the metrics that you can see through your CRMs of building that up. But I think if it's positioned as creating solutions and growing and scaling, rather than it's a channel and we need to plug it in, and I think that's the mindset that we're all possibly guilty of, especially when we're looking at the different sales and marketing channels, contributions, that kind of thing. So the human aspect, starting off on that, I thought was spot on. Not just about, what are the KPIs? It's, hang on a minute. When I was doing business development, sales, what did I appreciate? It was the team being invested in this as a long-term strategy and not just something that was about being able to just move through the gears quickly. And that the SDR piece is essential. It's not just a springboard, it's an evergreen function that needs to be continually nurtured.
I think what's interesting, Steph, you touched on package progression, the learning and development piece, the brand, what the brands are representing, the well-being, all of that is part of the attracting in the first place. But I think a big believer that you have to turn the mirror around and look at yourself. If an SDR function or person is not succeeding, to ensure you've got some basics: strategy, a plan, data strategy, the right tools in place. There's so many sales tech platforms out there, all those sorts of things. And I think all too often we see people diving in deep without some of those real basic things in place. And then we're not talking about SDR management there. We're talking about strategy. We're talking about management of decision making. We're talking about whether or not commercially you were ready to build an SDR function internally. And I just think it's worth us spending a few minutes on that before we get into, well, how do we manage SDRs? How do we get the best out of them? Because the answer is quite often you give them the right things in the first place and the right environment. Steph, what are the types of things that you've put in the mix there to help your SDRs? Because I'm guessing over the last year or so, you've learned a few things and you've put new tools in, you've changed strategy a few times. Just keen to understand kind of what are the basic things that you're giving to your SDRs to make sure that they succeed.
Great question. And sadly, there isn't the answer that I give isn't going to be the appropriate answer for every single organization, because I think the job of a sales leader is to identify that every single company, market, scenario into what's worked historically isn't necessarily going to work in this environment.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't matter if you have 20 years, 10 years, 5 years, or no years under your belt as a leader, you're going to have to test and you're going to have to iterate based on the environment that you're in. For me, like if you put data to the side, if you put tech stack to the side, if you put your channels and what approach is right to the side, so is it by call, by the phone, is it email, is it social media, whatever it may be, the fundamentals I think you need to provide an SDR with are the knowledge to actually engage on these platforms. And okay, you've got data, you've got contact details. What are you actually going to say to these individuals now that you've worked out where you're going to target them? So for me, I think it's important, and this is an exercise that we're going through at the moment, to really flesh out, but B, simplify in a really interesting way, make it as easy for the SDRs to use as possible. But first of all, the pain points, like what are the pain points that we're attempting to address here? Let's break it down by persona. Let's break it down by the context that is relevant. So for us, they're likely to have an existing system in place. Like, what do we know about the competitors, and what does that mean that we know about pain points? When you've got those pain points that you've identified, what are the questions that the SDRs can ask to unlock some really juicy information that's going to help them to book those demos? What's the value prop that you're attaching to solving that problem? Here are some case studies, the evidence, the impact that we've had, and the data points that prove that impact. And I think if you have that and you're training your SDRs on that quality of your messaging, then you can start to show them, well, these are the records, these are the previous track records of success that you can see and that you can aspire towards and you can try to beat. And then it's our job now to get all of that infrastructure around you, whether it's data quality, whether it's the tech stack, the training and coaching, that's going to improve on how you're using that messaging. But I think giving them access to that messaging at the beginning so that they've got at least that foundation, that comfort blanket, and then they're intelligent individuals, they can then build upon that themselves and apply their own kind of style to I think is super important.
Yeah, love that point. Thank you for that. Chris, I'm keen to explore something with you around the identity of how you lead and kind of the definition of your leadership style as a SDR manager or VP of sales or head of sales with SDR managers. There is a conscious decision-making process there, isn't there, that quite often people skip. and suddenly they've got a culture and an identity that is just what they've fallen into, versus understanding that by building out an SDR function, you might need a different culture. You might have bringing different profiles and personalities into the business for the first time. You might be a very heavily technical business, and suddenly you're bringing in fairly junior salespeople who are 10, 20 years younger than the average age of other people in the organization. And there needs to be a process whereby you define, how do I want to lead this team? What kind of leader do we need for them? What kind of culture do we need? And that surely should be a conscious process, shouldn't it?
Absolutely. But Steph again hit the nail on the head. What's right for one is not right for all. And imagine if you change roles, from a tech company to a tech company with a mission in a completely different industry sector, but fundamentally the process of sales remains the same. It's about how you structure the business to best address the customer base in a way that's not jarring to the people you're trying to talk to. I'm sure Steph has very different approaches to speak to the buyers that and we've shared this before, that have maybe different cash considerations in terms of the economics of what a scaled out deployment or value might mean back to them. So it's completely different talk tracks, completely different expertise. It takes potentially someone with more empathy than technical ability in terms of the differences between the types of organizations. But linking it back to the previous point as well, though, Owen, because what style does a VP or a sales leader need? They need to understand the underlying components of what works. And Steph's point about data is the only thing that you can measure that shows you whether it works or not. But you'll also have hunches, you'll also have your own feel, and you'll also have your own style that you can sustain. But it can't be just made up and disingenuous, because you won't be able to live and breathe the kind of mechanisms you create. But I have two things. One that I think Steph missed because she wanted to leave something for me to say about it, and another thing which I think is a really good measure of whether you've put all of this stuff in place correctly. And the only thing that I think that was missed is around objection handling. Because younger members of the team, or even, to be fair, your point was minus 20 years experience or plus 20 years experience, it could be anyone, but actually when they're coming into your business, objection handling is often the biggest thing that they're not equipped with. They've never been in that situation. They can't understand the comparative solution. They don't understand the competitors. They don't understand all these different things. And I tell you, for one thing, I'm always blown away by people trying to sell me life insurance, or people trying to sell me different things on the phone. I have such respect for people that make cold calls when they do it well. And everything I give back to them, they find a way to give me another objection that keeps me on the phone. And I love it, because it shows the skill of somebody that's got something of value to offer me, unless it's of no value and the call ends. And actually, that objection handling skill, the better the people can get with that is when you know that they are able to really fly and really contribute valuably to the business, because it brings out their tenacity, their determination, and the results just fly. But I think the biggest measure of whether all of these great things you've put in place as VP of sales, head of sales, whatever it might be, if your responsibility is managing those people, it's when whatever your structure of business looks like, and in mine it's commonly been SDR, account execs, seniors, VPs, whatever it may be. The measure of success is when you get the beneficiaries of the SDR's work, so MQLs, SQLs, or whatever it is that you qualify on, whether it's BANT or whatever it might be, when you get the sales teams actively coaching and supporting their respective SDRs, because they're seeing value from that collaboration. You'll all know, and you'll all have had experience of when reps, sellers, AEs, whatever you want to call them, say it's rubbish, it's not qualified, I don't want to go to this meeting, it's not got enough information, and it's just rejected without any background information or any form of context or narrative. That's when you've broken something, because somewhere in that chain there is a lack of respect for everyone's responsibility in the sales exercise. And for me, if you have that harmonious situation where everyone in the chain is supporting each other to do the job that they're measured on, you've nailed it. The rest of it is just experience.
Love that point. Absolutely love that point. I think it's fantastic. And I want to move on because you started to touch on something that there's a great lead into my next point, is around the expectation setting. So, well, I think we all know that we could probably go around the audience of people that are watching this now, and everyone would give a different answer in terms of how quickly does it take for an SDR to get to the point where they're 100% of quota, how long does it take them to get to the point of confidence. Everyone would have a different opinion. I'm just keen to get your experience on this. And Neil, I'll come to you first around ramp. I'm pretty public with this, that I think it's a common misconception in our industry that it takes 3 months to ramp an SDR. I don't know how it would magically be day 89 you're not quite there, and day 90 you are. The next morning you walk in and go, cool, I'm fully ramped now. I wasn't yesterday at 4 p.m, but I am today. And there's almost this industry perception that that's what happens. Yeah, my view is it takes a hell of a lot longer than that. And realistically, what do you define as ramp? You're always getting better. I bet you an SDR in year 2 would do better if they stayed than they did in year 1. And in which case, were they ever fully ramped in year 1? I'm just keen to get your take on this topic. Neil, I'll start with you.
To put some timings, I think on average it's 6 to 12 months to be embedded, immersed, really get and kind of the alignment with where you're working, the rapport building with colleagues, with the rest of the sales team. There will be those that can do that a lot quicker through either experience or instinct or talent, and there'll be others that might take a little longer. I think you're right. The ability to build pipeline, build callbacks, build that real body of sort of weight of pipeline that you need as an SDR. I think that's probably roughly where I'd throw a dart and say somewhere between 6 to 12 months. And I think you should feel whether your natural is going to be at an 80%, and some will overachieve, some will under. I think that's roughly where I'd stick a pin.
Steph, what's your opinion?
I'm going to be really annoying and really pernickety here, but I just think it completely depends. It depends on the complexity of the product. It depends on how well established your brand is in the market. It depends on the processes that you've got in place to enable an SDR to succeed. And I think to come back to your point at the beginning, Owen, it's all down to expectations and how you're defining ramped. So for us, we've got a junior SDR, we've got a mid SDR, and we've got a senior SDR. Now we've got these micro progressions in place because, to your point, you should be always learning, you should always be developing, you should always be improving. That's the goal of being in an SDR, is progress into something else more often than not. There are absolutely phenomenal career SDRs who can add a complexity after complexity to their career in that role. But for those looking to kind of go on to something else, you've got these different levels. And for us, our expectation and what we define as ramped is somebody is getting to 80% of their junior target after 4 months. And that's the expectation. Now, what we also do is we look at what they've put in, because there's partly a bit around skill, but there's also this component of will, and are they willing to put that effort, that graft in order to get the results? Because we're then there to help train and develop them to get them to that 80%. So I think the expectations, clarity on the expectations is super important. If you're looking at someone's kind of level of success, I don't actually believe in promoting SDRs to be, for example, an account exec before a year without any previous experience. Because if you look at the data, if someone moves to be an account exec within that first year, the likelihood of them actually hitting their quota in that role as account exec is pretty slim. Whereas if you look at 16 to 17 months, you've got more than 80% likelihood of actually hitting your quota as an account exec. And so I do come back to this point of, to Chris's point, and how actually it's about this path for progression, and how being an SDR can set the most incredible foundation for success in your career. So Yeah, I think it depends. It basically, in short, it depends on the context. It depends on what your expectations are for someone to be ramped, and then also how can we get them to that next step in their career as quickly as possible with giving them the right skills.
Fantastic. What's interesting there is that, you know, Neil gave us a range of 6 months. You're starting at 4. No one's starting at 3, and I think this is the comment that I keep getting is that as an industry we've kind of publicized the time it takes for us to expect an SDR to be hitting quota, target, whatever, or close to target. And Steph, in your case, 80%, which I think makes a lot of sense. I know a lot of organizations that do that, but some of the best SDRs I've seen have taken 4, 5, 6 months to get there, but then have gone that extra bit beyond in terms of performance, and they've been slow burners, but they come really good. Other people get there fast and they end up being inconsistent, and you might see them in month 2 hitting quota, but then they don't go and do it again till month 6, month 7, or whatever it might be. And I think this all comes down to the word "it depends" is the answer to everything in business, isn't it? It depends on all of the conditions you've got in place, but I think having a sensible set of expectations is key. Chris, I'll come to you because I don't know if you heard the original question. Keen to understand that if we're not saying an SDR comes in and generates you business from day one, that we're going to get an ROI straight away, what would you be looking to measure in the first month, 2 months from an SDR? What are the points that you're looking to get from them to say, you know what, they're on track and I'm happy with their progress?
Yeah, it comes back to equipping them with the right path to their own, you know, education. It's how good your onboarding is, not how good they are. If you've hired them and they've shown the right attitudes and behaviors, and they're driven and they're engaged and they're a sponge, then I'll be the person that says it can be earlier than 3 months, where someone shows their full potential. You know, it comes down to how you measure what an SDR is contributing, because it could be that what you're selling is incredibly complex, and there is a, you know, there's a window of opportunity to get interest in an appointment, a conversation to be started. Let's remember that, you know, if they're responsible to pretty much take it to the point where it's ready for sale, then that's an inside sales rep, potentially even a commercial sales exec that requires some support to close business. But if we're talking purely SDR, like most people, when you get them started, you know, there is an understanding that they will qualify an opportunity, and that will be, you know, either working on inbound or outbound activities, cold calling or digital endeavors to kind of try and get people to engage. Like if the requirement is just to bring that person in who's interested, has a budget, a timeline, and actually a need for what you're selling, and you have finessed the next phase of your sales engagement where, you know, somebody steps in and proves the solution and showcases it, like the SDR contribution can be relatively light. And once they understand that they're working, there's so much complexity to it, depending on everyone's different setups. But are they industry focused? Are you giving them the right data? Are they, you know, are they equipped with other sales technologies, which makes this easier? You know, I see a comment on the chat, you know, from a person who might be very equipped in showing great technology that can speed up and accelerate the time to having a conversation and turning that into a real opportunity. I think ramp up time, however, is arbitrary, as long as you measure it in the way that you think designates success. So ramp up could mean performing to 100% of your ability in the first quarter you're in the business by just getting your first appointment closed. That's the achievement that makes that you verify that they're on the right path. The second quarter could be incrementally greater, third, fourth, until you find them at a point whereby that's how you want them to then continue their momentum. But Steph is absolutely correct. I'd say 2 years is like at the point when anyone might have gone through the ramp, delivered sustainable results, and then might be ready for the next challenge, you know. And you have to be ready to be able to give that to people at that time, because there's another big problem which we didn't maybe discuss, which is if you want somebody to stay in that role for longer than that period, their interest, attitude, and I think wanes quite quickly, and then actually you have a challenge of retaining people that you've got up to their full potential, because you're not giving them the next piece that comes beyond their foundational learning.
Yeah, really interesting. And I think, you know, I touched on it earlier about the answer in everything in business is depends, because it always can be, right? And Steph's business will be different to Chris's, will be different to ours, and that's the reality. And I think this is where common sense sometimes gets lost in business discussions around building out an SDR function, in so much as, I'll give you a great example. I was talking to somebody last week who I'm doing some consulting with, who's building out an SDR function internally. Fantastic. They genuinely had a first attempt at a budget which had a return in month 1. Now, when I asked that person, how long is your sales? This is a clever business person. How long is your sales cycle? 2 to 3 months? Well, do the maths on that. And this is an intelligent, experienced business person who has sold before, yet this is a common thing. And I think that we're battling with that all the time, trying to get people to understand that we have to be fair to SDRs. We can't expect them to come in and solve everything straight away. We've got to give them the tools, give them the environment, give them the basics that we talked about earlier, and then we've got to set realistic expectations and communicate those properly and well all the way through, and then feedback on what they can do to get further ahead on those. Steph, I'm going to come to you. I'm keen to understand, let's say we're I don't know, we're at that 4-month mark, maybe we're at 3 months, and you can see you've got an SDR who you think you're giving the right environment to, you're giving them the right tools. You're not sure they're going to get to that 80% though. What are you looking to do at that point in time? What's going through your mind? What are you talking to them about, and how are you approaching that situation?
Okay, so for me, when we're measuring SDRs, I think this is important in any part of sales, is to think about what's our ultimate goal. What are we working towards? Now, to put that in the context of Birdie, we're wanting to improve the lives of older adults, and so our North Star is the number of adults whose lives we're influencing and we're impacting. And if you work back from that, we can measure it by MRR signed, because we price based on what's called service users, so they're clients of the agency. So we can go, okay, so MRR is our measure, and once we've got MRR, we're thinking, okay, well, how much pipeline do we need to generate in order to hit that MRR? Once we know how much pipeline, well, how many demos do we actually need to book? And based on that, how many conversations do we need to actually have? And based on that, how many calls or emails do we need to have in place? And again, it's not rocket science, right? We're just working backwards here. And so from the point of view of an SDR, we're going all the way back to calls made and emails made. And for me, the thing that matters is what input are you putting in to this? And is there, to come back to my point earlier, is there the will? Like, are you putting in the required effort of what we need in order to get to this number? If they're doing that and they're not necessarily seeing the results, there's a question around, are we doing enough to train, to educate this individual on how to book in those demos? And then that's when your training comes into place. I think there's a if it's not working, right, and we're having to go down the performance improvement plan route, for me, I should never, ever, ever feel guilty about putting someone on a PIP, because I know with complete conviction that I have given that individual absolutely everything that they need to succeed. So I think it's really important to make sure that we are doing that, and to question ourselves and challenge ourselves on what more we can be doing to help people. But ultimately, they need that will element in order to succeed.
Yeah, Neil, I'm keen to come to you, because obviously you've had a fair bit of experience in managing SDRs. What's your take on that? Because it's a difficult thing, I suppose. Like any other leadership challenge, it circles around communication, doesn't it?
Yeah, I've been listening to Chris and Steph nodding along to pretty much everything, and thinking, do you know what, the abundance, present day means that we can track and measure everything, inside leg measurement, all the rest of that around activities and things. I was given far longer time to get it right, because I started as a business development person without having all those measures. It was about revenue and trust, and they had to take that at face value. I also think that we read those dashboards and metrics and quota metrics and don't see that as being looking at how we can tweak to improve, rather than being scientific. And I think the difference between the science and that is quite a nuance, but is different. So for me, I agree with with what Steph said, and kind of don't want it to be too much of a love-in, but I think the guys have got a very clear handle. I think as well, thinking about selling with authenticity, it's very hard to do that if you've got such a rigid, here's your messaging, here's your sequence, here's that, we need you to be hitting this quota by this time. That's where you're ladling in that commercial awareness and more commercial piece in and around it.
Yeah, interesting. Guys, I'm going to just bring a couple of comments in. Interestingly, great to see Rob. I'll put it up on the screen. Rob said it's why hiring for mindset and attitude has such importance for SDRs, because you can teach the knowledge and skill. Rob, I think it's a fantastic point, a really good point, well made there. And our friend Jerry Hill, who Chris was giving the nods to earlier, so a former guest on one of these events. Any consideration for career SDRs? Do they have a place in your system or orgs? I'll go first and say, look, for me, I love a career SDR. I think somebody can genuinely do that role for, years and show that they're successful. I know they love it and I know they enjoy it. I absolutely would create a seat for somebody like that. For obviously, assuming that they were the right kind of fit. I think it's a positive rather than a put off. Chris, I'll come to you. What's your take on that question?
I'm going to answer that again from experience. Like career SDRs, when I was at Sage, was pretty much the norm. Most of the people in the business had been in post for a very, very long time. And guess why? It was a very mature business that understood exactly what it was doing and had already created its balance of account execs and sales personnel and leadership and all of the supporting functions. And it had been doing it for 30, 40 years with a pretty predictable ramp. And it didn't have growth targets of 100% year-on-year growth, doubling, tripling, and so actually they were paid well. The targets were slightly more tangible and maybe more manageable, if I dare say, because you weren't looking for that 100% growth, 100 leads a day or whatever it may be, and you weren't defining a category. You were managing the growth of the business in a sustainable fashion. There absolutely is a place for career SDRs, and sometimes the skill that you see in them, it's predictable. You can rely on their contribution every month, and again, I think yes is the answer. There is a place for them. The reason why in other organizations and maybe faster growth tech startups or fast-paced businesses that have those 100% year-on-year growth metrics, why maybe the career SDR doesn't necessarily exist, is because if that talent is being managed correctly, they become the next salespeople, and they fill the posts of the business growing with their success being part of the parcel. And so I think it really does relate to the industry sector or the type of business that you are, where whether or not your business has a place for career SDRs and actually that's somewhere where they want to be, or whether actually you're hiring people to fill the next roles you're creating with the company's growth. Fantastic point. Steph.
So I thought really interesting point from Chris there about actually the stage of the company. And the only thing that I would add to it is unit economics. So for me, 60% of our market is SMB. So I can't afford to have a career SDR because they command a significantly higher OTE than entry-level SDRs. So I just can't, I won't have an efficient engine if I have career SDRs. Where I think they're absolutely exceptional, and I just really wish that we were in a position that we could, is the credibility, the knowledge, to come back to Chris's point around objection handling. That doesn't just offer value in the exchanges that they are having, but if you have created this culture of peer-to-peer learning, then it's, all your SDRs around can just absorb and pick up all of that knowledge. So it's invaluable. But I think, Jerry, the contract value that you guys are talking about at Connect and Sell are slightly different to what we face at Birdie. But the point I'm sure you would want me to make about Connect and Sell is that the value and the return, the ROI definitely warrants it. But yeah, we're just operating in a different banding.
It's an interesting point, isn't it? Because I think we're coming back to the fact that every environment is different, and you're working with constraints, and therefore you have to make what I call conscious compromise. You've got to make a compromise in certain areas, and in one area it might be actually we're happy to have people that don't want to progress because that works within our model. For you, it might be actually the compromise is I'd love to have a career SDR in there because the learning by osmosis, but we can't afford to do that within our with the constraints of our model. And as long as you're making those decisions consciously, I think that's the right decision. I think it's where we make them based on gut reaction, based on emotion, those sorts of things that we get ourselves into difficult grounds. So this is a fantastic point. Neil, I'll come to you on the same point. Be interesting to get your take on that career, because I know we've got a couple in our team. We see the benefits of it, right? We see people learning from them directly.
Yeah, I think a couple of points on that. One is listen to a call that's made by someone who's got years of experience versus someone who's pretty new, and that will answer the question as to how they are almost having a mini discovery call rather than a sales call. Second point is who are you trying to talk to? If it's a head of C-suite, then having someone who's really experienced versus someone who's relatively junior, the balance of tone and conversation suddenly levels up slightly. And the third is that you and I probably both know we've had some of our best either tactical changes or we should do this from our SDRs who have had enough time to understand our world, understand what we're doing, and come to us and say, Neil, have you considered doing this? Because I've spent lots of time doing that. So it's having that feedback from the people who are fulfilling the role. If it's just a revolving door that you're looking to move them through a personal development plan, and bearing in mind it's got to be a blend, I think it's difficult for them to have enough time to help us make that role function and everything better.
Do you know what? I think Steph made an interesting point there, and I think you've just touched on it again. And I just wanted to highlight it around, we will run multiple campaigns for multiple clients. And what you will see, to your point, Steph, is that those more sort of career-based SDRs, they will work on the harder campaigns. They will work on the ones where the sales values are bigger, where we have to have multiple conversations even to get the first meeting, where we're talking to C-suite and enterprise. Just because like you say, the margin is there, right? The opportunity is there. If you're transactional, if I took those people and said, right, you've got to go and work in an environment where there's no investigative work, there's no prep before the call, it's pure volume based, pick up the phone, dial as many times as you can, let's go talk to people and have as many, they would struggle in that environment because it isn't necessarily the right environment for those individuals that we've got in the team. And I think this comes back to, again, identifying what's right for your business. What are the right profiles to bring in, which leads you back to talent and attraction, doesn't having the right package and the progression and the learning development, all that kind of stuff in place, but also you understanding clearly what you need and what is right for your org. So to Chris's point, if your strategy is to move people through into AE as quickly as possible, as effectively as possible, then that might be something to avoid. And I think it's a really valid point and a great question from Jerry as well. So Jerry, thank you for that. Always asking the good questions. Much appreciated. I just want to also acknowledge the comment from Robert. I'm not going to throw this around the panel because I think this could be a whole roundtable in itself. He said, keen to understand the thoughts around the terminology of cold call. If we do research thoroughly and prepare in the right way, is it still a cold call or an unexpected business call? I think we're probably, I'm not going to share massive opinions, and I'm not, Chris, Steph, Neil, I know you'll all be chomping at the bit to get in that, but I think we've got 7 minutes left. If anyone is keen to answer it, we go with one answer. Otherwise, I think the comment from me would be, look, we're probably arguing on how you label something. And I think everyone's going to have a different opinion on that. Anyone keen to throw a really quick answer on that one?
I've got a really quick one.
And
it was going to be my counter argument to the career SDR. Is one of the other things on top of what I was saying earlier about objection handling is actually teaching people to not face imposter syndrome around having the right to phone somebody that's got a C in front of their job title. If you've got something valuable to sell and that product, item, service that you offer is going to fix a pain point that they have or a challenge that they face that they're measured on, it shouldn't actually matter what level of seniority or experience you are. But the better you are at objection handling and understanding the pains of that individual, the better. But there is no right answer to cold calling, whether prepared or not. Because if I'll be honest with you, even if you're calling and you're smashing the phones as fast as you can, there has to be some intelligence and some logic to the way that you're undertaking that, which means that a call that's made without any prior thought is going to have a lower level of success than one that is into a particular vertical where you know the value proposition for everyone that sits in that bubble, and you can repeat and finesse that to the audience that you're working on. But preparedness is absolutely paramount, even if it is cold calling at scale.
Love it. Love it. Go on, Neil. I knew this would be a keen one.
But it's all on who you're calling. If it's a cold call to them, it doesn't matter how much prep you've done and how many screens you've got open on there. You are cold calling them. That's my take.
Yeah. Okay. Steph, just to round it off, you got any comments? You might as well.
I would say just call it a prospecting call. If cold call has negative psychological impact on your SDR, call it a prospecting call. But yeah, just be prepared and go into it believing you've got value to add, like Chris has said.
I think you call it what you want. If you've got an SDR who's worried about the phrase cold call, then they probably shouldn't be sat in an SDR seat in the first place. But you call it what you want. It doesn't matter. You're picking up the phone, you're talking to somebody, and that's part of the role. And I think we'll move on from that point. Look, we've got 5 minutes left. I'm just keen to explore one last thing, which is around, we're talking about managing SDRs, managing SDR programs. Neil, you touched earlier, having the data, having the information there to support you. Maybe we could just go around quickly and just touch on what are some of the things that you would like to see if you're managing a team of SDRs or you're managing a function, an SDR function. What are some of the key data points and bits of information and insights you'd like to see on a regular basis to help you decide on whether it's performing well, it's not performing well, you're doing enough of something, you're not doing enough of something, or the individuals are performing at the right level, and that informs your decision making. Neil, do you want to go first? I know this is a topic close to your heart.
I'll be brief because I know I'm running out of time, and love to hear Chris and Steph. Meetings, SAT meetings, those that go, it's looking at those things downstream. I think that they're the areas that I think I focus in on. I think we will always know how many activities have been done. And I think we've touched on that whole setting boundaries and expectations of what a good day looks like. This is where you need to be moving. They're the key bits. How many meetings or leads have been set, and how many of those sit? What's the feedback from the AEs or the business team coming back, and just keep looping, keep feeding that back. Chris, do you want to go next?
I mean, well, I won't repeat Neil's points, but for me, forgetting all of the normal metrics you'd measure on, I want to tick in the box from the fact that who is being prospected, what is being prospected, when it's being prospected, it is aligned between SDR, rep, VP, everyone that's there, and that boredom hasn't creeped in, and there's no observation happening where people are just meandering out into different areas that are actually not going to align to the ultimate strategy that you set out to achieve. And for me, that's a really important thing to stay on the right track for, because it's very easy to see natural entrepreneurship come into the way that people work, but actually it takes you down a track that might be a good idea, but actually doesn't deliver value. So I like to see a tick in the box that everyone's on the same page.
I like that. Avoiding creep, which we see very, very regularly. Steph.
Sorry, struggling to unmute myself again there. So for me, it's winning by design that talk about this. So if you look at the conversions in every stage of your funnel, if you're able to alter and improve every step of the funnel by 10 percentage points, so for example, from 40 to 44%, then you're going to see a 50% uplift in your revenue. And that's a significant impact on the performance of your sales org. So for me, I'm kind of looking at how we can not only influence the activity and the input, but how can we improve each stage of the funnel. For us at the moment, for example, we know that 1 and 2 of our demos held result in a signed contract. So we know that we're getting quality demos. For us, it's all about actually the stuff that comes before that in the creation of the pipeline and seeing what we can do. So we look back at a historic trend of at least 6 months and compare how our conversions are tracking at a team level, but there's also an individual level, because it points towards where you need to focus your attention. Is that on having better quality conversations? Is it actually that our called conversation conversion is an issue and we need to focus on the quality of data that we have? So for me, using every stage of the funnel to point towards where the blockers are and where the challenges are is the most efficient way to improve your revenue.
Love that. And I think the overarching point here to wrap us up is that you have to have that data in front of you. It doesn't matter what you're looking at. In some ways you can get data overload, but you've got to have key data points in front of you that you're going to use to inform your decision making. And the final point I'd make is around, what is the reason you're running an SDR function? So if it was for, driving client acquisition, then what's the acquisition rate per month, per quarter, and is that increasing and going in the right direction? If it's about ROI, if it's about the bottom line, then what have you invested? Why have you invested it? And when's the return coming? And what's the return performing like? And I think quite often people are looking at that top bit, appointments and number of clients. They're not looking at the fact that it's cost them 4 times as much as it should have done to win a client, and therefore they're running at a loss, and the business would be more profitable but smaller without their SDR function. I think it's a really interesting point around the things that you measure. Guys, I'd love to keep talking. We do try and stick to the hour as strict as we can, and we're bang on 3 o'clock now. Thank you so much for your input today, Neil, Steph, and Chris. I've really enjoyed exploring this topic with you, and thank you to the audience for the questions that we had, and for people for joining us as well. Steph, Chris, how can people get in touch with you, and who should get in touch with you? Steph, I'll come to you first.
Anyone and everyone. I love connecting. So I'm on LinkedIn, and I'm Stephanie.McLaurin@Birdie.care if anyone wants to get in touch. But good luck spelling my surname because I haven't figured it out yet.
Love it. Chris, how can people get in touch with you, and who should get in touch with you?
Equally a complicated surname with too many D's in it, but Christopher.Dudridge@Sirocco.com is my email address. I'm on LinkedIn as well, and Twitter, not that I use it very often, but whoever wants to get in contact with me, please do. I love building my network equally around the sales communities, participate in a lot of the sales community events that take place. But from a business standpoint, very large companies who have very big challenges in how work gets done. And I'd very much like to talk to all of them right now.
Brilliant. Guys, I've really appreciated your time and your input today. Thank you very much indeed. Have a good rest of your day, and thanks to the audience for joining as well.
Thanks, Owen. Thanks, Neil.
Cheers.
Thank you, guys.